Hello, good evening. Nick Smith here, speaking to you from London. Welcome to number 15 in our series of Alpine ClubCasts. Tonight, with Simon Richardson and Micha Rinn, we're looking at their recent first ascents in the Alps. And Luca Signorelli is going to fill us in on some of the historical background. I really hope you enjoy it. So, first tonight, we're joined by renowned Italian climbing historian Luca Signorelli. Luca is going to give us an outline of the significant historical climbing events on the Italian side of the Mont Blanc range. Luca splits his time between Turin and Courmayeur, and according to Victor, has a strange conviction that the French side of the Massif might not actually exist. But for tonight's purposes, Luca is an expert on the history of the Grand Jorasses. Over to you, Luca.
Thank you, Nick, and hello, everybody. Hello from Italy. So in the next 15 minutes or so, we will go through the history of one of the most fascinating, at least known and climbed area of the Mont Blanc range, the Tranchée wall or southeast face of the Grand Jorasses. First, a bit of orientation. The Grand Jorasses is a mountain of the Mont Blanc range. It sits on the main watershed between Italy and France. And while the south face, the Italian side, overlooks the green and very pastoral Val Ferret, the famous north face overlook the Le Chaux Glacier. They are very different environment. While the south side was inhabited and frequented by humans for the last few thousand years, the north face, that is much more, the north side that is much more remote, was just began to be frequented by hunters and crystal gatherers just a couple of centuries ago. So it sounds a bit strange that everybody, or at least everybody who's interested in mountaineering, knows about the north face, but very few people seems to know about the south face. Now you see the gray arrow points directly at the southeast face. It's 1,300. We are going to see a few pictures of that later. It's 1,300 meters tall, and it overlooks this glacier, the Prasek Glacier, that has the distinction to be the last glacier of the Mont Blanc range, who was walked by human beings in 1972, so quite recently. Of course, the first climb, just to give you a bit of historical context, the first time the Grand Jorasses were climbed in June 24th, 1865 by no one else than Edward Whymper, just 20 days before the Matterhorn catastrophe whose anniversary is today. It's interesting to note that Whymper didn't climb such a beautiful and imposing mountain per se, but just because he wanted to have a better view of the Aiguille Verte, another beautiful 4,000 that overlooks Chamonix, and he thought, quite rightly so, that from the top of the Jorasses that we are going to see with here, with the letter B, he thought it was the tallest of the two tops of the Grand Jorasses. He thought he could have a good look at the Aiguille Verte. It's also interesting to note how those pioneers were had an enormous stamina, because he did the round trip, Courmayeur, top of the Jorasses, back to Courmayeur in less than 20 hours. So it was in a completely new terrain, completely virgin terrain. So let's fast forward to the 1920s of the 20th century. And a very interesting figure of mountaineer, artist, poet, political activist and philanthropist arrives in Courmayeur and decide he wants to climb something that is completely new and completely completely close to his heart, close to his mind of artist. His name is Albert Rand-Heron. He's an American, but he's born in Italy. He speaks Italian. He's imbibed of Italian culture. And he hires two local guides, Evariste and Élysée Crew, and decide he want to climb the ridge that you're seeing here, the one with the letter 2, K, and G. This is what will be called the Tronchet Ridge in the future. So far, it has no name. We are in 1928, and Albert Rand-Heron is just 26. They arrive with the two guides more or less at this point, the notch that you see. Then they decide that probably the rest of the ridge is impossible to climb. So they deviate over the wall, making a very circuitous trip that will lead them later the same day to the top of the mountain. Keep in mind that this is done in an appalling weather with no visibility and the use of maybe a couple of pythons. So you see real adventure terrain. Albert Rand-Heron, unfortunately, could have become one of the greatest climber and the greatest mountaineer of the first part of the 20th century. Unfortunately, in 1932, while returning from an attempt with a German expedition to Nanga Parbat, he decided he wanted to climb the great pyramid of Cheops in Egypt, and he falls from the summit while returning from the summit of the pyramid. He's just 31 years old. And the next time this area is see any climber is in 1935. When, 1936, when Élysée Crew, the same guide who was with Albert Rand-Heron in the same area, managed after few attempts to climb the entire Tronchet Ridge, as you see there. Here is the route they do, is the same classic route that is climbed right now. It's interesting because Élysée is climbing with a client who is a rich magnate from Italian tycoon, who will, Tita Gilberti, who will be, by the way, the same person that will finance and build the construction of the lift from Courmayeur to Pointe-el-Bronner, the one that was replaced by the Skyway very recently. They are both excellent climbers, and they Crew think he will have, because he still remembers his experience from 1928, and he thinks he may have some trouble climbing the first tower of the ridge, the one with the letter A. Okay, if you see there. So he's taking all the way up to here a long wooden pole that he thinks he's going to use as a sort of artificial climbing gear to climb this tower. By the way, when he arrives over the summit of the Guide de Tronchet, that is this place with the letter D, he decides not to bother, and he leaves the pole there. And that pole remained there until 2010. So for almost 80 years, he sat there as a sort of reminder of this first attempt to the first climb to the Tronchet Ridge. Is a very fine route that recently has become a classic, but for years it won't be repeated. So you see, this is not a place for people looking for glory. It's not a place for people looking for fame. It's a very seldom frequented area for people who is serious about exploratory mountaineering, not for glory seeker, and also for competent climbers. One interesting statistics is that this is an area was seen very little in terms of accident and rescue. This is a testament to the competence of most of the people who climbs in this area. And next in our story, here we are Alberta Randerron, here we are Elysée crew. Fast forward to 1972 when these two gentlemen, Alessandro Gogna and Guido Macchetto, managed to make the first traverse ever of the Prasek Glacier, and then following the route that is marked here with 7, with the green line, they make the first full ascent of the wall, because the 1928 route, the one with Alberta Randerron, only managed to climb the upper half. And it's a fantastic adventure, according to what Alessandro told me, with some objective danger, like rockfall in the lower part. But once you arrive more or less here, the rock here is excellent and the climb is great with classic difficulties. Again, it is a fine route that absolutely makes no sensation and seems not to create any kind of interest in people frequenting the Mont Blanc because of the remoteness, the length of the access, and the fact that the Grand Jorasses are notorious for having somehow difficult descent. So people tend to concentrate on the north or the east side of the mountain. It's worth remembering that while Alessandro Gogna continued to climb, went to K2 with Reinhold Messner, and then became famous for his first ascent in the Dolomites, Guido Macchetto in 1975, so 3 years after doing this fine climb, went with Gianni Calcagno on the Tirich Mir, a mountain on the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and made simultaneously with the first ascent of Dunagiri by Dick Renshaw and Joe Tasker, made simultaneously the first ascent of a major technical Himalayan climb in a single push, Alpine style. But while, I'm sorry to say that while Dick Renshaw and Joe Tasker went back to England and made history and inspired a generation of British climber to do the same on the greater ranges, unfortunately, the situation in Italy was much different. And when Macchetto came back, he was met with skepticism and even indifference. He wanted to return to the greater ranges, but unfortunately, the next year he died in a climbing accident on Mont Blanc. Let's continue, fast forward again, and there we meet one of the most amazing exploratory climber the Italian climbing culture has produced, the great Giancarlo Gracie, that you see here on the top left. Giancarlo, we are talking about someone who literally promoted and single-handedly promoted ice climbing, waterfall ice climbing sport in continental Europe. I have to say a bit earlier than his French colleagues did. Someone who in the 80s was capable of climbing on new terrain 300 days per year, which is an amazing feat. And Giancarlo is a name that is recurring through, if you flip through any guidebook of the Mont Blanc range, you will see his name very often because he opened new routes, new daring routes everywhere. And Giancarlo was a bit obsessed with the Tronchet wall because he had seen a line that you see here with the letter 6, the number 6, the red line. I've seen this line together with his old climbing companion, Gianni Comino. Gianni unfortunately died in a climbing accident in 1981. So Giancarlo really wanted to climb this line and dedicate it to the memory of Gianni. And Giancarlo went back to this wall 5 times, okay? He made 5 attempts before he could find the right condition, because for such a tall wall that is fully south looking, facing south, it's very difficult to find the right ice condition, because when the upper part is icy and climbable, the southern part normally is a single huge waterfall. When the lower part is in good condition, the upper part is normally full of snow and dangerous. So he finally, in 1985, together with Mauro Rossi and Renzo Luzzi, 2 young guides, Italian guides from the Val di Susa, he found the condition and he climbed the entire line in a single push, 12 hours from the start of the major difficulties. And here we see, this is a rare photo that was given to me by Renzo Luzzi. So we see Giancarlo and Mauro Rossi climbing the head wall of the line. You see the kind of condition, the kind of terrain. You will see that the rope are dangling below. They are not roped together, because at some point the condition were starting to become stormy very rapidly, and they knew they had to summit before the major snowfall began. So they unroped and they started basically soloing the route up to the summit. This route was when Giancarlo came back, he told everybody, I think this route won't be repeated any soon. And he was a good prophet, because for 35 years, there were attempts to repeat this line that they all failed, mostly because of the condition. This year, this February, 2 French guides had managed to climb again this line in 10 hours, so more or less the same time I made Giancarlo and his friend, and they confirmed the quality of the climb. Last but not least, in 2010, Marcello Sanguinetti, Sergio De Leo, and Michel Caranotte decided to attempt the lower part of the grassy line and then enter these very deep and scary looking couloir and try to attempt to climbing up to the top of the 3rd tower of the Tronchet Ridge. They arrived 80 meters from the point where the line links with the ridge, and they found a blank wall that could be climbed exclusively with the use of bolts. They decided out of ethical motives not to do it, and then abseiled back all the way down to the valley. In 2012, 2 British guides managed to, Matt Elliker and John Bracey, attempted the same line again. They again arrived 80 meters to the exit and on the ridge, and again they decided not to bolt those last 80 meters and went back. So this line that was provisionally named Alpine Sud in full south is still to be completely climbed. Just to close, of course, the next new line is Diamond Ridge that Misha and Simon are going to discuss tonight. Before we close this very short overview of the history of the Tronchet Wall, I want to remember an amazing British climber who has climbed in this area more than anyone else, not Italian, Tony Penning. Tony has climbed many short or not so short route on the lower part of these walls. There is one I want to remember, the Fiesta de Monstre. that is this line with the number 1 that you see here over this, that is the east face of the Aiguille de Prasec. It's great exploratory climbing, great quality climbing, but as we see, this is a place not for people looking for fame. This is a people who are serious about exploring. Okay, thank you very much for following me through this brief excursion through the history of the southeast wall of the Grand Jorasses. Nick, back to you.
Thank you, Luca, so much. Absolutely fascinating. Really enjoyed that. So next tonight, we're joined by Simon Richardson in Aberdeen and Micha Rinn in Gießen in Germany. Over the weekend, the PLA d'Or long list was published, and Simon was on it for a route on Mount Waddington in Canada's Coast Mountains. We can ask him about that later. He's best known as a Scottish winter climber, but he's a keen alpinist too, and he first visited the Alps over 40 years ago and has since climbed many classic routes and Grande Course. Simon enjoys looking around new corners and has made 18 first ascents in the Mont Blanc range alone. Further afield, he's climbed new alpine routes in Alaska, Canada, the Cordillera Blanca, Indian Himalayas, Greenland, Karakoram, the Caucasus, and South Georgia. Micha Rinn works at the Institute for Sports Science at the University of Gießen, where he's responsible for training future climbing instructors. He's been instructing in mountaineering for about 20 years, working for different sections of the German Alpine Club. His true passion is for alpine climbing, and most of all, ice climbing in winter. And his trips have taken him to places like Iceland, Patagonia, Canada, Nepal, Namibia, Jordan, and most recently, Oman. Simon and Micha are going to talk about the Diamond Ridge on the Jorasses and Perfect Storm on Mont Blanc. At the time, these new routes attracted an unusual amount of attention. Folk were surprised that brilliant unclimbed lines such as these were still to be found on our doorsteps in the Alps. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you for the introduction, Nick, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for listening. And thanks to Luca for giving us such an insightful history of the Tranché Wall. It's a real pleasure to be doing this presentation with you tonight, Luca. So as Nick says, Micha and I will be describing 2 new routes that we climbed on the Italian side of Mont Blanc range in 2016 and 18. There was nothing groundbreaking about our ascents. They could have been made by many members of the Alpine Club, but they demonstrate the huge potential for adventurous mountaineering in even well-known and well-traveled mountains. So the story starts in 2012, when Tom Prentice and I made a series of visits to Chamonix with the objective of climbing new rock routes. This picture shows Tom on the first ascent of a 20-pitch long rock spur on Point de la Fouille at the head of the Argentia Glacier. Tom and I focused mainly on the Italian side of the range in our search for new ground, and in particular on Monte Gruetta, which lies above Valferre. We climbed 4 new routes on this mountain, including 2 on the rarely visited east face, shown here. The quality of the rock was amongst the best we'd ever encountered in the Mont Blanc range. Over 3 summers, we climbed 6 new routes. It was all relatively straightforward. If you open your eyes, there are dozens of opportunities for good exploratory climbing throughout the range. I then began to wonder about the possibility of a new route on the Grand Jorasses. I am rather fond of the Jorasses. I'd climbed the mountain 4 times before, and it had given me some of my finest ever alpine adventures. But I knew a new route on the Jorasses was really just pure fantasy. The 1,000-meter high North Face has attracted the finest climbers of successive generations and is crisscrossed with over 30 lines. But it's always good to dream, so I buried myself in my library of Mont Blanc books for inspiration. I knew that if a good new line existed on the Grand Jorasses, it would have to lie on the Italian side. I studied hundreds of photos. I found one or two new route possibilities, but to be honest, they are not very attractive. They're either threatened by seracs or are exposed to stonefall and don't follow inspiring lines. I then came across this article in Climb magazine by Lindsay Griffin and Luca. It described the Italian-French attempt on the unclimbed ice couloir on the Tronchet Wall in 2010 that Luca has just described. Had they summited, the article said, they would have achieved arguably one of the most notable ascents in the Mont Blanc range this century. This really made me stand up and take notice. How could I have missed this? I'd written off the Tronchet Wall as being too dangerous, but maybe I shouldn't have been so hasty. And now, most importantly, I had an up-to-date topo showing me where all the routes go. So in 2014, I drove round to Italy to have a look, and here is the photo I took. The Untitled Couloir is in the center, and the Tronchet Wall routes are to the left. But there it was, the Diamond Ridge, the beautiful sinuous ridge line that divides light from shade, bounds the right side of the Tronchet Wall and rises up to join the Tronchet Ridge coming in from the right. At long last, I had my line, but the scale was huge. 1,400 meters high, the Tronchet Wall is the highest face in the Mont Blanc range. The Diamond Ridge starts even lower, 200 meters lower. So overall, it's 1,600 meters high, making it one of the biggest mountain features in the Western Alps. It was both daunting and very exciting. I showed this photo to my climbing partners. There were no takers. I even drove one of my friends through the tunnel to take a look, but everyone said the same thing. Thanks, Simon, but no thanks. Then in January 2015, I wasn't very well. In hospital, doctors told me I was seriously ill. But the one thing I couldn't get out of my mind was that picture of the Diamond Ridge. I was determined to get well again and climb the route. I recovered and became fit again through the rest of 2015. But the problem remained, who would join me on the Grand Jorasses? Then this man came on the scene. Micha Rinn is a very talented mountaineer and a super climbing instructor. Micha trains the instructors, based in Germany. We met in 2014 at the Envers des Aiguilles hut. The weather was bad, and Tom and I were waiting for a good forecast to climb our final Gruetta route. Micha was keen to go winter climbing in Scotland, and he represented Germany on the 2016 Scottish Winter Meet. We spent 3 days climbing together, including a new route on Loch Nagar. We got on very well, and on a long pre-dawn walk, I suggested we have a go at the Diamond Ridge that summer. We had 2 weeks to climb the route. We warmed up and acclimatized on some easier routes, and then with 4 days of our holiday remaining, we set off early for the Diamond Ridge. The weather forecast was good for 2.5 days. Very steep approach slopes led up from the valley. We skirted the west side of Punta Gracie. It felt very Scottish, and we used our ice axes in the grass. Above, you can see the hanging icefall that threatens access to the foot of the Diamond Ridge on the left. I'd studied photos and was very worried about the danger from this, but global warming had made it less threatening, and we were soon safely across below it and established on the ridge itself. The rock was wonderful. It was beautifully clean and solid with loads of holds. You could almost climb with your eyes shut. Every time you reached up, there would be a perfect crack, jug, or chicken head. We climbed 18 pitches that day to reach a small bivouac site at about half height on the ridge. Next morning, the first pitch above the bivvy was rather awkward. We cheated a little here and used a couple of points of aid. And then we continued for another 18 pitches, and the rock continued to be superb. In fact, the rock on the south side of the Jorasses is renowned for being amongst the best in the range. We joined the Tronchy Ridge between the first and second towers that you can see on the skyline. We'd climbed 1,200 meters of new ground to reach that point. The route now became more mixed and rather icy. We had to change from rock boots into crampons. And the climbing continued to be very varied and interesting. Conditions were quite snowy. Note the footsteps on the snow crest behind. So we're back in rock boots now for more rock climbing. You can see the Tronchy Ridge stretching away below to the left and the Diamond Ridge directly below. Micha is climbing the steep wall that gains a prominent right traverse below the imposing third tower. We expected easy ledges here, but instead we found smooth, unprotected slabs that were soaking wet with dripping snow. The belay was poor, it was one poor wire. Micha led a full 50-meter rope length without any protection before reversing it all and coming back saying he couldn't complete the finishing moves because the final slabs were covered in ice. He couldn't put his crampons on because there was nowhere to stop, not even a single foothold. So Micha had to repeat the entire traverse, rock climbing across the unprotected slab in crampons so he could then climb the ice at the end. It was now becoming dark and it was all very tense for both of us, but it was an outstanding lead by Micha. I followed in the dark and we bivouacked immediately afterwards. It was a cold night. This is the welcome sunrise over the valley. You can see the Matterhorn on the right. And here is Micha looking bright and happy next morning. To make our bivouac ledge, we had dug into a snowbank on top of the second tower. We continued up the original route of the Tronchy Ridge, traversing above the top section of the Jefferson City route on the east face to join the upper crest. We were on the summit at midday, just as the forecasted bad weather was sweeping in from Mont Blanc. The descent went smoothly and we reached the Boccolati hut at 5 p.m. to a great welcome from guardians Franco Palotto and Roberta Cuthri. The hut was empty because of the poor weather, and at first they couldn't understand where we'd come from or what we'd climbed. Once we explained, they both became very excited, and Franco immediately contacted the Italian Alpine Club and also Luca, who was staying in Courmayeur. Next morning, Luca met us in the rain, halfway down the trail from the hut. This was rather special. Luca and I had been corresponding for years, so it was great to finally meet. Luca was charming and enthused about our ascent. "You have made history," he said. "This is only the third time the Tronchy Wall has ever been climbed." In reality, the greatest pleasure came from discovering such a prominent line. There was nothing groundbreaking about the Diamond Ridge. It could have been climbed over 50 years before. In fact, the Tronchy Ridge, climbed in 1936, is probably just as difficult. So the Diamond Ridge was a great experience, and Micha and I had formed a strong team. We shared the same values and both had a strong sense of adventure. So what next? In 2017, we visited the Coast Mountains in Western Canada and made the first ascent of the southwest face of Monarch Mountain. This was similar to the Walker Spur, but a little bit longer. It was another great adventure, but that's another story. So in 2018, it was time to attempt another dream. Way back in 1993, I'd climbed the Red Pillar of Bruyères and continued at the summit of Mont Blanc via the Bruyères Ridge. We were fit and strong, and on the summit, I didn't want to go down. Wouldn't it be wonderful just to carry on and keep on climbing and keep visiting summits? Why go to the greater ranges when you can have long multi-day adventures on Mont Blanc itself? The dream of a greater ranges experience on Mont Blanc has stayed with me for 25 years, and I resolved that next time I climb the mountain, we would not hurry back down. So over to Micha to tell the story.
Yes, thank you very much, Simon. And hello from Germany to everyone. Before I start, I would like to say that I follow this Alpine ClubCast series from the beginning on. And I think the setup is a very nice idea. So thank you to the whole team of the Alpine Club for this effort. Now I'm going to take you to the hidden face of the Mont Blanc. Let's have a quick view on the map. When we talk about hidden areas, I want to show you what that means. The red dot centered on the map between Chamonix and Comayeur marks the summit of Mont Blanc. Just south of it, and circled in red, is the valley of Val-Béni at an altitude of 1,500 meters, from where we start our approach. The Val-Béni gives access to the Miage Glacier, here circled in blue, which is the longest glacier in Italy. The black arrows point towards the upper part of the Mont Blanc Glacier, as well as the west face of Point Louis-Amédée. This boat-shaped area is nearly 2,000 meters above the valley ground and is not visible from anywhere else, except from the far distance of Dôme de Miage, as we'll see at the end. Looking a bit closer on the next map needs some explanation. The initial idea was to climb the west face of Point Louis-Amédée on a new line, directly up to the summit. And additionally to that, we thought about turning the whole route into a long multi-day adventure, like in the Crater Ranges, but this time without traveling around the globe. So, beginning from Val-Béni on the right yellow arrow, we followed the Miage Glacier and climbed about 1,000 meters up to the Quintino Sella Bevercut, here located at the blue dot. From there, we climbed Point Louis-Amédée and kept on climbing Broiler Ridge towards the summit of Mont Blanc, the red M. The red dot marks the Valo Bevercut, an emergency shelter at an altitude of about 4,360 meters. From there, we carried on and extended our route by climbing the razor-sharp crest of Aiguille de Pionocé, before traversing all three summits of the Dôme de Miage, and then down via Trélaté Glacier to Les Condamines and Saint-Gervais left on the map. The entire route took us 8 days in total. Here we are at the Miage Glacier. It feels pretty wild already here. You have no infrastructure and you are alone, which is quite unique in this Mont Blanc range. Today, the glacier surface is entirely covered by rocks. The Mont Blanc Glacier flows down from the right. We climbed up the ridge in the upper center of this photo, up to Quintino Hut. Tom Petty once said, "Good climbing and good friends often go together. Each is essential to the enjoyment of the other." And that's actually how we live it in the mountains. For what I can say, meanwhile, the interpersonal interaction and relying on each other is crucial. And beside exploring new terrain, it's what drives me most in the mountains. And especially on this route, we've had some magic moments I'd like to share today. It took us a full day to reach the Quintino Sella hut from the valley floor of Val-Béni. The hut is beautifully situated in this remote area. It offers fantastic views of the surroundings. It was built in 1885 and rebuilt in 2015 because of its historical importance, being the base of the former Italian regular route, the Tournai Spur, towards Mont Blanc. Today, the hut is largely restored. In fact, the inside is a little bit like a museum, with many inscriptions of famous climbers on the wall, protected by a glass front. We used the next day for reconnaissance and had a closer look to our possible route on Point Louis-Amédée. Till then, we haven't seen any detailed photo of the entire face. And we think this one here is one of the rare photos of the face, because we went up and spent the whole day. It is unusual to be there in the afternoon. Climbers who climb Tournai Spur pass this area usually in dawn. Point Louis-Amédée is the highest mountain, which is totally in Italy. Quite obvious is the geological division halfway up. The lower part is good quality granite, and the upper part is gneiss, unfortunately of its poorest quality. The first ascent of the face was climbed by Joseph Pocherel, who guided the two Juliamina brothers up to Point Louis Amedee. They climbed it in 1901, even 10 years before Karl Blodig climbed the whole Broiler Ridge. Given the fact that this mountain is one of the hardest 4,000-meter peaks to reach in the Alps, the first ascent was a remarkable achievement. The major couloirs, marked with the black arrows, are all climbed as winter ice routes. Giancarlo Gracie was also quite active on this mountainside. He climbed the pillar on the right-hand side of this face in 1983, which was the second route on the entire face. The following year, he came back and climbed Fanta Couloir. By the way, the pillars on this face look similar to the Broiler pillars, and that's just because they are on the other side of this ridge. But here, none of these routes have never been repeated. Our route, Perfect Storm, is about 700 meters high, which is about 860 meters climbing distance, and we climbed the team on site, and it's rated ED1 and French 6A+. On the opposite, you see the Aiguille Très Latte on the left and Domes de Miage in the background on the right. The next morning was time for action. It started very promising. Soon after the first pitch, we've been in a nice climbing flow. We found a great line, and climbing this perfect granite was pure joy. Climbing a west face in the morning means you're moving in the shade. And in this altitude, we had pretty cold fingers during the climb, so we were looking forward to welcoming the sun. We split the route in several sections, and each section had a little bit of its own climbing style, which was quite fascinating. The upper part of this granite section is dominated by the climbing towards this granite pinnacle, and after that, we reached the gneiss section. The gneiss section was pretty much at the end of the day, and by the time we were already looking for the bivy spot for the night. It was a great climbing day. We climbed about 700 meters of unexplored terrain that day, and we nearly reached the summit as planned. We spent the night bivouacking just below the top of Point Louis Amedee, and we were happy and we slid in our bivy sacks. Tomorrow, we just have to climb the Broiler Ridge to reach the summit of Mont Blanc. Unfortunately, the next morning changed the whole situation. Bad weather came in full 12 hours before planned. And by the time we left our bivy spot, it started to snow and the wind increased. We started climbing Broiler Ridge. Simon has climbed it several years before, and he told me that it takes quite a while to reach the summit. Now I realized why. The whole ridge was extremely brittle and delicate to climb, especially in a proper storm. We've been climbing up and down a section of pinnacles. Snow blew like needles from every side into my eyes, so I could barely see anything. We started discussing whether to push on climbing or sitting it out right here in our bivy sack. Eventually, we had enough food and could afford an extra day. On the other side, why not trying it? Simon told me he felt like another day, it's like another day in Scotland, and he was fine leading for a while. I remembered our climb on Loch Nagar during the last BMC winter meet, where we had a howling wind like that. In this moment, I was fine following for a while. It was okay for me because for some reason I didn't feel at home at all in this raging storm. And it was great to have a partner to depend on in such a situation. For a moment, I felt very sheltered deep inside. Leading in this terrain was the real challenge. It took hours and hours to find our way through the storm. We were both lost in our tiny world, limited by low visibility of a few meters of rock and a rope vanishing in the fog. Everything was narrowed down to climbing, rope handling, freezing. Until we finally reached Mont Blanc de Courmayeur. This was where Simon suddenly reached his low point. Responsibilities changed without any words. Now it was on me to take over. I was relieved to be here now, even in this raging storm, because Mont Blanc was the imaginary finish line for me that day. From here I knew I would find a saving Vallée Hut, no matter what. I've been here 3 weeks before while guiding a group, and now I try to remember the exact way down the shelter. But it has been snowing for over 12 hours now. All the flanks were avalanche prone. Visibility just didn't exist. We had to be very careful. Mistakes were not allowed in this terrain. It turned out to be very complex to find a safe way down, and we were dangerously running out of energy. It was just after darkness when we bumped into the shelter of the Vallée Hut. Totally exhausted, but very happy to be out of the bad weather. When I slipped into my sleeping bag, I stretched out and wiggled my toes. I still remember feeling my toes was a big relief that moment. We had to sit out the storm for another full day. Inside the shelter, I thought our gear would unfreeze by itself, but this was not the case. So we had a little bit of work on that during the next day. For many years, it was a dream to me to climb that razor-sharp ridge of the Guy de Bionnassay, and now we finally could continue our route. We made good progress, but we also felt a loss of energy during the last couple of days in this altitude. This is a view back from the summit of the Guy de Bionnassay towards Mont Blanc. The ridge coming up from the right is the Broiler Ridge, and you can see Point Louis-Amédy on the very right. In the morning hours, the west face of Point Louis-Amédy always looks as a pretty dark face, even in such a bright day like this. But it's actually not the case, as we've seen. The last day saw us on Col de Dorme on our way down to the Vallée of Le Contamine. On the left, you see one of the summits of Dôme de Miage. I would like to end with this photo on top of Dôme de Miage. It shows our route of the last week, the ascent of our new route Perfect Storm up to Point Louis-Amédy, our adventurous summit crossing, and a satisfied partner. From my point of view, exploring the intensity of such a trip with a partner who enjoys the experience the same way, I think is the real essence of mountaineering. And because at the end, it's always about people. And those mountains are the perfect vehicle to live our dreams. So I hope you enjoyed Luca's introduction of the forgotten side of the Mont Blanc range, as well as Simon and my story of our recent first ascents in this beautiful and wild area. Thank you very much for listening. And with this, I would like to hand over to Nick. Are you there, Nick?
Thank you. Thank you, Micha. Enjoyed that. So thanks to Luca and Simon as well. I've got a question for Simon. I loved your article, Simon, in the Alpine Journal. So are you saying there's no need to travel beyond the Alps for a so-called greater ranges experience? And the other question I wanted to ask was, why did you name the route the Perfect Storm?
So we called it Perfect Storm because, as Micha explained, that storm came in effectively a day earlier than we expected. We knew that we would have bad weather. You're going to go out for 8 days, you're going to get some bad weather along the line. So we knew we'd actually have some bad weather. But the place we didn't want bad weather was on the Broiler Ridge. I mean, the Broiler Ridge, you know, it faces west. It's where the weather hits Mont Blanc first. And we were very committed up there. And as Micha said, it was like climbing, climbing in a storm in Scotland, which is a fun thing to say, but actually it wasn't much fun, to be honest. And it was probably the worst weather that either of us ever experienced on the Mont Blanc range. So it was a perfect storm. It caught us in exactly the worst possible moment. But it did, in hindsight, make the experience a lot more memorable. But I probably wouldn't want to repeat it. In terms of greater ranges experiences, I mean, you're right. I love going around the different ranges of the world, experiencing them and exploring them, and looking around new corners there. But there's also great satisfaction in actually exploring an area that you actually know quite well. And I've got to know the Mont Blanc range very well over the years. And it's actually very satisfying to be able to sort of unearth a new corner. And the idea of actually then turning it into a sort of long, week-long outing is kind of very satisfying. And okay, we debated actually whether to take a tent and not use huts. In the end, we decided to use huts, but actually the huts weren't very convenient. There's the Valo hut, which is not a nice place to stay actually, but obviously it saved our bacon that night. And there's the Quintino cellar hut that we started from, and there's a Durea hut, which is on the way to the Dom de Miage. But otherwise, there's not that many huts. So it's quite a challenge logistically to figure it all out. But yeah, so yes, it was a great adventure.
Thanks, Simon. Micha, I've got a question. Actually, it was about food. You mentioned food a couple of times. And of course, you had that unplanned extra day in the bivvy hut trying to defrost your gear. Presumably, you didn't have any food at that point, did you?
Well, yeah. Food and gas for water is always a big issue on such a route. I mean, the climbing days are pretty long. You're on the feet for 12 or 15 hours a day, and you're climbing new terrain. You don't know exactly in advance how long all this will take, and which means you can't calculate it down to the last bar, and then on the other side, you have all the weight and the limited space in your rucksack, and you don't want to move with your heavy bag on your back. So actually, we calculated 8 days for this entire trip, but we brought food for about 5 to 6 days. And we thought if everything runs as planned, we would also have the opportunity to get food at the Duria hut on the way down. But because of the given circumstances and the weather, I lost on this trip 6 kilograms of weight, and so we both came down quite skinny. The food was definitely an issue on this one.
Well, thank you, Micha. Thank you. So it's a perfect storm and good for the waistline. Yeah. I can see there's a question coming in from Marian, or it might be Sarah. I don't know. Do you?
It's from Marian. Micha, it's a question for you. Obviously, as German, you tend to climb a lot in the German Alps, the Austrian Alps. Are there areas where you think you can have similar adventures, like multi-day, almost, 8-day tours available in a similar secluded environment, or is that so specific you have to go to Chamonix? What's your experience in the Austrian Alps, German Alps for that?
Thanks for the question. That's a good question, actually. And I think what I showed on Miage Glacier is that the landscape there is quite spectacular. In fact, it looks like a little bit like in the Himalaya. It's surprising, but for sure there are many opportunities in the Chamonix area to do trips like that for multi-days. I mean, the mountains are high. That's one thing. So you have full climbing days, and that's guaranteed there. So, and compared to the Austrian Alps, I mean, for sure you can have experiences like that in terms of that you connect several peaks and summits. And I think it's always a matter of how you planned the whole trip before. And of course, it is all a little bit smaller. Mountains are not that high, like in Chamonix, and the valleys are also not that deep. But I think it's pretty much, it depends on you how you plan your trip, and it's. At the end, it's all about creativity, you know. I mean, you can do this nearly everywhere. I mean, you can also have a trip like that on 3,500 meter peaks, and there are many of them in Austria. So for sure, this is possible also in Italy, and but it's perfect to do in the Mont Blanc range. Yeah, that's what I think.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that question. I've got a question for Luca myself, actually. Luca, I just wondered if you could tell us how you managed to, I mean, obviously you've got a tremendous breadth of knowledge about the history and, you know, who's doing what, but how do you keep tabs on the sort of what's being done? You've obviously got some kind of secret source.
Well, no, it's not a secret. One of my sources for current climbing on the Jorasses is Franco Perlotto, the warden of the Boccalatte hut. The fact that I live in a house in Courmayeur that is just facing the Jorasses. So one of my favorite sport at night is taking my binoculars, pointing at the normal route, and then calling Franco, say, okay, you have I see two headlights coming down. They are on the reposoir, so they're going to be at your place in 2 hours. And there are two people they're now traversing the Wimper couloir and so on. And so sometimes if there is anything important going on, he calls me back, say, oh, there's people who did a new route, two Russians, they did a new route on the Red Pillar on the east face and so on. This is one. The second thing is that I'm physically on the Jorasses very often on the south side, because again, in the last couple of years, I haven't had much spare time because I'm involved in politics in Courmayeur. But for most of my life, I spent a lot of time physically on the Jorasses, particularly on the lower slopes in the places where no one goes. It's a beautiful place. For instance, a lot of people doesn't realize how much wildlife there is on the Jorasses, on the south side of the Jorasses. Particularly in the last 10 years, there is a possibility to meet all kinds of interesting wildlife, interesting flowers, crystals, everything. So it's a beautiful landscape, and it keeps you coming back again and again and again. And the third thing is that I've been reading a lot about the Jorasses since I was a child. I grew up in Courmayeur, and most of the reading I did was climbing history, and most of the climbing history of the Italian side of Mont Blanc. So it's something like, it's a sport that I've been pursuing for almost 50 years now. Okay. So, you know, I don't know if this answers your question.
Absolutely it does, yes. Thank you. There's a question coming in from Nigel. Nigel, do you want to go ahead? Is that from YouTube?
Yeah, it's from YouTube. I have a couple of questions. Question for Simon. You've climbed in the Kishtwar region of the Indian Himalayas. Do you think that as a region is like the Alps of India in terms of potential? What about the rock and conditions? and how do they compare to the technical routes in the Alps?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. I climbed in the Kishtois, it was a long time ago now, it was probably about 30 years ago, and I found it hard. And it's interesting that the routes of people have come back to the Kishtois in recent years. It was closed for a long time due to political reasons. It's now open again. And the routes that are being climbed there now are astonishing. But interestingly, it's often by some of the finest climbers in the world. So perhaps I don't feel quite so bad now that I guess when I went there, you know, when I guess I wasn't very experienced. I was in my early 20s, and we did some good peaks. We made first ascents of one or two of the major peaks there, but it was clear there was huge technical possibilities. For example, Cerro Kishtois, which has become very famous, we climbed the mountain next door to that. Roger and Everett and I climbed it. We were out 12 days doing that. And it was Roger who actually named Cerro Kishtois. It's obviously a made-up name. And we called it that because it just looked impossible. It looked like Cerro Torre. And I couldn't envisage anybody, you know, climbing the thing because, you know, the rock looks so compact. And there's now about, you know, obviously Mick Fowler climbed it first. And that was an amazing ascent. But there's been 4 or 5 ascents since, and it's really gratifying, you know, how climbers around the world have taken, you know, really strong technical skills, rock climbing skills, mixed climbing skills, and applied it to some of the world's greatest mountains and doing it in Alpine style. So, you know, I feel privileged to have seen it, and I'm probably one of the first people ever to see it first, I guess. But then to see what's happened, you know, 30 or 40 years hence is great. So I thought the route that Øystein Hawthorne did and team did 2 or 3 seasons ago on Arjuna was an amazing ascent. And I was delighted that, you know, it was a young team, one of their first trips out there. They actually did a really major route on that mountain, you know, probably you know, equivalent to a Walker Spur type route, and it did look absolutely amazing. So that was really, really gratifying to see. And then I know Tim Elson was out there. Was it last? I think Tim's on the call. Last year, and Tim had a couple of near misses on a couple of amazing lines. So it's great to see these things, which for me probably were really futuristic, you know, now being tackled and succeeded on, which is great.
What happened to the discarded long wooden pole? Did it become a museum piece?
No, unfortunately not. It remained on the summit of the Aguille de Tronchet, and then he split in 2. But he remained there on the insistence of the son of Élysée Crew, Enrico Crew, who is a very good friend of mine, by the way, that he really said, my father carried it to that summit. He asked to stay there. So every time I went to the summit of Aguille de Tronchet, there is a bivy hut close to the summit of the Aguille de Tronchet, called it the Yakia bivy hut. That is one of the most remote of the range. I went there something like 5 times, and every time I took a picture and I took it to Enrico just to show the progress. And it was sad to see this wooden pole that was actually a ladder, okay, made with a wooden pole with pegs put horizontally, splitting more and more and more. And then unfortunately in 2015 it broke, and I think the splinter are still there. But it was important for Enrico to know that that memorabilia was there on the mountains where his father intended that to be.
Thank you, Luca. Actually, may I ask, would you be prepared to help make a topo guidebook of the south side of the range?
Oh, okay. This is the 1 million question. I have the material. I probably enough material to write a War and Peace of the Grand Jorasses, but I don't have the time.
No.
Well, like in the last 20 years, every season I tell to myself, okay, this is the year. I'm going to write it. I'm definitely going. And to be honest, I tried for many years to get in touch with the widow of Gino Buscaini. Gino Buscaini was probably the most important guidebook of writer in Italy. And in 1967, he did the Italian, something like the Italian version of the Vallot Guide. The Vallot Guide was made by the French Alpine Club. Gino made a sort of correspondent book with every single route on that part of the range. This was supposed to be updated around the mid-90s. Unfortunately, Gino passed away, leaving a wealth of material that is still there. And but this material seems to be off limit. So I had to write my own, actually trying to find, particularly flipping through at the books, the logs of people who went to the Boccalate Hut or to the Yaqui Hut or to the Canzio Hut that they call the Grand Jorasses, which takes a long time, actually. So the short answer is I would love to do that. I have enough material to do it, but I will never find the time unless I stop being involved in a lot of different stuff that is not related with climbing.
Yeah, well, maybe we can persuade Victor to persuade you.
Oh, that I would love that. Victor knows my position about him writing or him helping me to write. So absolutely.
There's another question coming in. It's from Paul Newby. Go ahead, Paul. Good to see you.
Thanks, Nick. I think we ought to be told how long this pole was, this famous pole, this artificial aid, and we've heard its history, but we don't know how long it was.
I've seen it, personally I've seen it for, it was something like 2.5 meters tall. So it was not very long, because the reason for the pole was a single passage on a pitch that I don't know if anyone listening to this podcast is somehow familiar with the trancheries. The first real difficulty of the ridge below the second tower, below the first tower, is a off-width chimney that was very difficult to climb without nailed boots and everything. And because our soil was very much normally was filled with ice. So Eliseo Crew, I actually managed to meet him before he died in 1986. I was very young at the moment, but I managed to meet him and to ask him about it. He said, I was convinced to use this because I thought it would be impossible to pass this chimney. And when I arrived, I could see from the distance that actually there was an easier passage nearby. So I say, okay, I don't bother. I will leave that here. He never used it. He left it well below the actual difficulties. So he stayed here as a memorabilia. I think that I could use the picture of that pole for my future book on the Grand Jorasses, definitely.
I've got a question for Simon. By the way, folks, I'll start bringing things to a close. So if you do have a question, do put your hand up. Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, Simon, about the PLA d'Or long list that I mentioned at the beginning, and your trip to Mount Waddington.
Oh, well, it's very, very kind of you to mention it.
Congratulations, by the way. I should.
Yes, thank you very much. That's very, very kind. I must admit, it's obviously it's nice when you do something when it has a broader recognition, but don't get any ideas that what we did is going to win a PLA d'Or. It was fairly low key, to be honest. Nisha's been on the long list as well, not this year, but the last couple of years. So the great thing about it is, previously the PLA d'Or was quite an elitist event. But now I think they try and make it less elitist by drawing attention to you know, sort of maybe 50 of the more interesting ascents that have happened in the previous year. So yes, it's nice to be recognized, but again, what we did in Canada was, you know, similar to what we just discussed this evening. I mean, you know, adventurous stuff, but not at the cutting edge by any means. Many Alpine Club members could do what we did.
Well, I'm sure that's a very modest response, but thank you. Yeah, Micha, I just wanted to bring you back in. You said, you told me that you were heavily involved with the German Alpine Club. We're about to, we've just revived an exchange that we do with the Italians, which is happening, starting in about 10 days' time, and thankfully going ahead, in spite of everything. Yeah, I just wondered, perhaps it's time for a joint meet with the German Alpine Club in some way or other. Perhaps you could help to organise that.
Yeah, well, in 2016, I had a chance to join the BMC winter meet, and which was actually the last one by the BMC. And I just liked the idea. It was so fascinating to bring motivated people from all around the globe together and climb together with them. There was a lot of networking, and the whole setup was also very good. And I think that's also why the SMC together with the BMC repeated that winter meet last year. It's just a good idea. I mean, it's perfect. And that was also the idea. I just picked it up and I thought, well, why not putting a partnership together with another club from another country and have an annual meet or so, and show other clubs our beauty in all the nice climbing areas in Germany, for example. And then the next year we could have a meet in Scotland and do something else there. I think it's always nice to have exchange and do networking and climbing together, and yeah, also discuss different ideas of safety techniques. There's so much to talk about, and it's easy to fill a week with that. It's very easy. Yeah.
Absolutely, and yeah, we should definitely discuss that. I mean, I personally, as an Alpine Club member, I'd love to. You know, I've been climbing in the Pfalz. I loved it, but where are your favourite spots in Germany for climbing yourself? I mean, perhaps rock climbing.
Well, my favorite area is indeed the Pfalz. It's a 2 hours drive, and for the weekend, it's just perfect there. It's our paradise, and that's actually where I want to do. Bring the SMC club in next year, yeah, because it's so nice there to climb. And there are also other very nice area. I mean, we have the famous Frankenjura, yeah, and you don't have to say anything else about that. It's very famous. But we also have a very nice basalt area, which is probably the biggest one in whole Europe. It's an hour west from where I live. So actually, even in the middle of Europe, in the middle of Germany, there are many opportunities to climb different sorts of rock. The Pfalz with its sandstone, basalt, and limestone. There are many options here.
Thank you, Micha. I mean, it's a particular pleasure for me to have such an international cast of speakers tonight. So yeah, thanks for joining us. I think I saw Michael with your hand up. Was that a mistake, yeah. Michael?
Okay, yeah. So let me just so especially with Micha here as a climbing instructor. So when you're going on these multi-day trips in the Alps in particular, is there anything you really like to take with you? Anything you really leave behind that you might be a bit different from what everybody else does?
Well, for me in personal, I like to be as light as possible, for sure, for many reasons. I mean, if I go to the Alps, I mean, at home we have all this electronic stuff, and I'm also working a lot in front of the computer. And when I'm in the mountains, I really like to leave all that stuff behind. So this is one thing what I really like, to be very light and just leave all the trash behind, just for a while at least. So, and then I really focus on having light stuff. Maybe you have seen on those photos, the first photo Simon showed is what he showed on me, when he showed me, when he introduced me, is you see a backpack full with stuff, and even the mountain boots were sticking out. So Simon is even better in saving weight, because on the long trips we made together, every time I couldn't make it to get the boots in, and Simon always had his boots in. So he must be even a bit better in saving weight and saving stuff. Yeah, but and yeah, you ask about what are the important things. I mean, yeah, I don't bring any luxury things on a trip like that. I only bring, of course, all the safety things which are important, yeah, but all the regular stuff you need. And this is actually where we're focusing on, yeah, just keeping it simple and light, and being as fast as possible, because that's always the key, especially in the high mountains, yeah, where routes are very long. And even in summertime, when you have a lot of daylight, it's never enough time, yeah, to make it to the top. So yeah, fast is the key to be safe as well. Yeah.
So you don't bring your champagne then, Micha?
No, we keep this for afterwards. I'm also more on the whiskey side than on the champagne side. Yeah.
Good man. Good stuff. Well, unless I'm interrupted again, I will sum up. So it just remains for me to say thank you so much to everyone. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for tuning in. Next week's Alpine ClubCast number 16 is entitled The First Ascent of Link Saar. We're heading across the Atlantic for an evening with the American Alpine Club. Graham Zimmerman, Mark Ritchie and Steve Swenson, who was guest of honour at the Alpine Club dinner in 2017, joined us to talk about their brilliant first ascent of Link Saar in Pakistan's eastern Karakoram. Do have a look at the Alpine Club Library YouTube page, where you can watch, like and share all the previous Alpine Clubcasts. Thanks all for joining us. Keep safe, keep active. Please unmute yourselves now so we can applaud tonight's speakers. And good night from London.